Hi, I'm Dr. Richard Ruling, here to share with you on the topic of Be All You Can Be. It's a TED-type talk on Christ's wedding parables and messages. He promises that he will make us ruler over all that he has if we can understand the conditions that I want to explain to you. We start with the great teacher's best-known wedding parable in Matthew 25 of 10 women that were going to a wedding, and there was an unexpected delay as they waited in the evening with their lamps burning. They went to sleep, and their lamps went out. And maybe that's a parable about us today as far as our focus and what we're interested in. But at midnight there was a cry made, "The bridegroom comes, go ye out to meet him." And they all woke up, and 5 didn't have enough oil. They hadn't brought extra as the 5 wise had done. And they asked the 5 wise, but could you give us some? They said, well, we might not have enough, better go buy some. And so while they were gone, the bridegroom came, and the wise went into the marriage. And a little later, that says the door was shut, by the way, and a little later, the foolish came along with the extra oil that they purchased, but they experienced an unexpected denial, could not get in. Sad experience for those that weren't prepared for the sudden event. The wedding parables all teach the sudden event beyond which there's no time to get ready. Okay, we must be expectant at the right time, and we're going to look. Christ said, "Search the Scriptures; they testify of me." This is about where is the wedding. You know, the 5 foolish couldn't find it without buying oil, and if we search the Scriptures, we find in Zechariah a parallel scripture with oil for lamps, and it comes from the 2 olive trees, Old Testament, New Testament. I think the Jews that do not accept the New Testament will be short on oil, and maybe Christians who don't read the Old Testament, because Christ said, "Search the Scriptures; they testify of me." Searching the Scriptures, we find that the Exodus is a parallel event to the wedding parables. Even that midnight cry in Matthew 25, verse 6, goes back to Egypt, Exodus 12, verse 29 and 30. A great cry went up from Egypt at midnight when calamity or judgment fell. God said, "I will execute judgment." And we might wonder, well, why or what? But America is like Egypt today. Egypt killed babies, if we recall, in Exodus 1st chapter, but maybe hundreds, maybe thousands. But America has aborted 60 million, and we're supposed to be a Christian nation. Hello, that's a bad situation, and just as Egypt enslaved Israel, we have been enslaving most people by corporate America with alcohol, tobacco, drugs. Prescription drugs are a leading cause of death, and we call it health care. There's bondage to food, fashion, fiction, greed, gambling, music, sex, perversion, pornography, violence, TV, you name it, when we call it freedom. Freedom to choose bondage, I guess. But God is going to execute judgment, as His Word says, and we should be ready for that time. The parable of Matthew 25 has this midnight cry, and there's a rule that I need to explain to you that Bible scholars call the rule of first use. Where a word or phrase is first found, it often has a meaning or context for the end time, because Christ is also a word, and He's the first and the last, it says in Revelation 1, verse 11. So go where a word is first found. It often has a meaning for end time. We're going to do this with a second parable now in Luke 12. It starts out with, "Fear not, little flock, it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." Well, kingdom is what happened in Egypt when God took them to a covenant at Sinai. He says, "If you'll keep my covenant, you'll be a kingdom." And He also later said, "Return, I'm married to you." So He regarded that covenant as a marriage relationship. And that's what we can have if we are ready for the sudden event that is impending. Luke 12, it says, "Have your loins girded." Rule of first use goes back to Egypt again. They had their loins girded. Israelites wore long robes which could trip them, so they girded them up if they were going to run or be working, so the robes would not interfere with them. So we should be ready similarly. And it says in the next verse, verse 36, to be like men that wait for the Lord when he comes from the wedding and knocks, that we open immediately. Well, we're not going to explain, this is too involved to explain everything in this parable. This is part one, but what's the knock? Okay, the knock is an earthquake, and we can see this by using the rule of first use again with the Laodicean message in Revelation 3. There are half a dozen parallels. Both of them have a knock. Both of them are to open. And if we open in Luke 12, he will make us ruler over all that he has. In Revelation 3:21, we sit with him on his throne. Sitting on his throne is the same as being ruler. Okay, it's the same meanings, parallel passages, but each one offers details that is not seen in the previous one. And so in Revelation 3, a couple details that we may have overlooked. Again, it's a lukewarm church. This fits Western Christianity. That lukewarm church was content with its materialism. He says, you think you're rich and increased with goods. You're really poor, blind, and naked, okay? And so that's a bad situation if there's a knock at the door. The man who is naked cannot go to the door, or he's blind, he can't find the door, and if he's naked, he can't open the door. And these words are addressed to the agelos, or messenger, to the church. The point is that our Western churches are focused on many things, but we're really lukewarm and not prepared to open as we should. And naked because we don't have the proper truths. It says in Ephesians 6:14, gird your loins with truth. And if your pastor isn't interested in the wedding parables and the fact that they're at Passover, when Christ says to watch in Luke 12:37, blessed is that servant whom his Lord finds watching. He will gird himself, make him sit down to eat, and will serve them. Well, if they think that it's not important to share communion on the eve of Passover, as we've been talking about, when the wedding parables all have Passover imagery, they are naked on this topic, And I hope that some of your pastors, but it's not a good thing. In Matthew 22, a man is thrown out for having no wedding garment, and that's what most of Western pastors are today in terms of these appointed times that God has given and the imagery. But there's an important modification I need to share with you. In Matthew 24, there are many parables that point to a provision that's different from Passover. It's a month later. As the days of Noah, the flood came with Passover timing, but a month later in the second spring month. And the next parable says, then shall two be in the field. Then means same time. Okay, so here are parables linked together with second Passover timing. The same is true for the 10 virgins. When 5 missed the wedding, Christ said, watch, which means, again, be awake. And we can't be awake every night. It would be unfair for Christ to ask us to do that unless there were clues. And Passover was the only night in the year that watching or being awake was required. Christ asked his disciples, watch with me. Couldn't you watch 1 hour? Okay. And so that's the time for watching and prayer, and also the time to share the communion, which replaces the Passover lamb. We don't need to kill lambs. He instituted in its place what we call the Lord's Supper, communion. So, nice time to celebrate it, but Christ ended that parable in Matthew 25 by saying, watch, you don't know. Bad translation, it's eido, the Greek word, means be aware, consider, understand. He was saying, you don't understand. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country. And that just flies by us because we're not really familiar with the law that Christ said, not one jot or tittle will pass from the law till all is fulfilled. Okay, till heaven and earth pass. Well, heaven and earth are still here, and we should understand that those are appointed times, and that we can, in those appointed times, there's a provision in Numbers 9, verse 10 and 11. If you're in a long journey and you can't, if they took a trip to another country and couldn't get back in time for Passover, they were to keep it the second month. They were not excused. And so this is how Christ ended his parables. He said that for the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, and he was the master that took the long journey. He went to heaven. His return must conform to his law, which he said is still in effect till heaven and earth pass. So it will be second Passover for us, a knock, earthquake, because that's how the church, the Laodicean church, ended. It ended in an earthquake in 65 A.D. where he knocked. Serious knock, and it will be for us. We will all get the idea that something big is happening, okay? And if he knocks, we are supposed to open. This is too much to cover in this one thing as far as how to open. This is part one. We will cover part two. But I just want to give you a heads-up sign so that you will know that it really is impending and not just talk here on YouTube. Lots of things are being said and who knows what. But a good sign from Christ is the fact that he said, Matthew 24, it begins with the destruction of Jerusalem. Those are the first several verses. And Zechariah 14 says the same. He says, the day of the Lord comes, all nations will be gathered against Jerusalem to battle. And so if we see that, and I'm giving you this 1 week before I think it will happen, August 22 is the 10th day of the 5th month. That's when Nebuchadnezzar burned the house of the Lord in Jeremiah 52, verse 12 and 13. Josephus said in 70 A.D. it was the same date to Titus that the temple burned. Okay, so bottom line, God declares the end from the beginning. If we see it happen, judgment is coming. Judgment is coming to America. Second Passover next year will be big, next spring, and we need to wake up the whole world. Everybody ought to understand this, and they have the choice, as in the days of Noah, whether they want to get into the ark or whether they want to watch and pray, as Christ said. That would be the ark. Okay, the symbolism would be parallel. Or in Exodus, they put blood on the doorpost. Well, if you share communion, it's the wine is Christ's blood. He says, "This is my blood." So similar imageries, if we want to celebrate it, believe it, share this with your friends, send a link to it. God bless you. And get the book that I just shared with you. If there's destruction in Jerusalem, you can go to Amazon.com, type in my name, Richard Ruhling, spelled R-U-H-L-I-N-G, and Destruction of Jerusalem. The book is cheap, but ruler over all that he has is out of this world. So thank you for giving it a look. God bless you. Look forward to seeing you at the top. We're in amazing times, and thank you.